to welcome up our panelists. First, we have the Honorable Manny Diaz, who's the Commissioner of the Commissioner of Education for the state of Florida, Department of Education. So Manny, please come on up to the stage. He also is a former state senator, former state legislator. He's from Miami, so great to have him working all over the state now. He started as a teacher as well, so it's great to have a teacher at the helm of the Florida Department of Education. Unfortunately, we were going to have one of his counterparts, Ryan Walters, in Oklahoma. Ryan was not able to make it because he's doing some due diligence in Oklahoma today, actually testifying. So we were not able to have him come today. But we do have three more great panelists. I'd like to welcome the president of this fine institution, Miami-Dade College, Madeline Pumariega. And also, author and founder of New Discourses, James Lindsay. Thank you, James. And our moderator today is Aaron Withe of the Freedom Foundation, a wonderful organization, and also want to thank the Freedom Foundation for also being one of our sponsors. So thank you all. We'll let Aaron take it away here to get us started, and this will be about an hour panel, and then we'll probably have about a 10 or 15 minute break before Peter and Bambi come on stage. So thank you, guys.
Well, thank you, Francisco, for hosting this panel. Thank you for Bambi and Peter and everybody else involved in the Economic Club. My name is Aaron Withe. I'm the CEO of the Freedom Foundation. The Freedom Foundation, I'll give it a little background on before introducing the rest of our panel and asking our first questions. The Freedom Foundation, we fight government unions. Government unions, I heard a clap, thank you, whoever that was. Government unions, like the teachers' unions, they own our public education system in America today. And the scandal of teachers' unions is that they take money from hard-working public employees and they funnel that money directly into an inherently radical political agenda. So I'm sure that's going to come up today. We have three great panelists, but before I ask them questions, I want to see a show of hands from the crowd. How many of you think that public education today is heading in the right direction? Okay, like two people. Okay, so nationally, 70% of adults believe that K-12 education is on the wrong track. And if you're simply looking at public education based on test scores, then you'd have to agree. Most kids are measurably failing versus generations before them. And that doesn't include what teachers are seeing on the ground, which are behaviors, which are problems with kids' mental health, bullying, and the list goes on. So I'm excited to be a part of this panel today and talk more about some of those issues. So the first question I want to ask is, why does it seem that public education is in such a decline? And arguably there's nobody better to answer that question than Dr. James Lindsay, the author of 6 great books, including my favorite, The Marxification of Education, his newest book, Cynical Theories, How Activist Scholarship Made Everything About Race, Gender, and Identity, and Why This Harms Everybody. James is an international speaker, founder and president of New Discourses. So James, why is our public education system in such a decline today?
It's really actually pretty simple. Our public education system has been captured. You could argue, in fact, that the public education system in the United States was designed badly in the first place, in fact, kind of designed to be captured. I would, as the title of my previous book, The Marxification of Education, tells you, I would say that what it's been captured by is a Marxist ideology that's tailored to attack Western values. It's not going after the old class-based Marxism, but rather primarily identity politics, global sustainability, and these other things that the kids are all literally neurotic about. The world's going to end, so I can't grow up. Everybody has to think in terms of some kind of identity class, racial, sexual, whatever it happens to be. But that capture of education, I think, when you understand how it works, how it's taken place since the late 1980s and early 1990s, which is when the Marxists themselves say that they successfully took over our colleges of education. If you understand how it actually works, it tells exactly the story that you just described of why what we have is mentally and emotionally suffering or mentally ill activists who can't read, can't do math, don't know history, don't know science, or any of it at grade level, and all of this going downhill. The method by which they are being educated today is called critical pedagogy. The critical refers to critical theory. Pedagogy is, of course, the theory of education. And the very simple way to explain what this is, what critical pedagogy actually does, is that it's a method of using academic material as an excuse to having radicalizing conversations. So this allows the radicals to get around the resistance that a superintendent, that a parent, that anybody else outside of the school system might have to having radicalized curriculum, because they can't see it. You might have a very benign math problem, like Johnny's riding in the car on his way to an amusement park with his mom and dad. The amusement park's 50 miles away. They've driven 20 miles. How much further do they have to go? Simple subtraction problem, grade 2. And what the teachers are trained to do in the classroom, as long as nobody's watching, is to engage the students by saying, who's ever been to an amusement park? Then to take, when half the kids raise their hand and half the kids don't, you now have a difference. And what you do is you switch off of the academic material and onto the difference. Wow, only half of you have ever been. That's not fair. So you add an emotional component that gets them engaged to radicalize them. Why is it that not everybody gets to go? And you prime them until somebody says something like, my parents won't let me. Then you have a conversation about parental authority. Or not everybody can afford it. Then you have a conversation about socialism. And this methodology, imagine that you had schools that do this. What would the fruit be? You know, it says in the Bible, judge them by their fruits. What would the fruit of this be? You would have kids who are emotional and mental wrecks because they're dealing with highly charged issues all day, who are political activists, who can't read or write or do any of the other academic material because the academic material is merely, in the critical pedagogy literature, a mediator to political knowledge. And so we get what this is designed to do. And like I said before, Isaac Gottesman, at least, who is a Marxist educator and historian previously at Iowa State, I don't know where he is now, wrote a book called The Critical Turn in Education in 2016 and said that by the year 1992, they measured that they had full control of American colleges of education. In the last panel, they talked about you have to have a vision. Ambassador said you have to have a vision to communicate the vision. That vision was very simple for them. We call it the long march to the institutions, but in education and practice, it was capture the colleges of education, then you capture the teachers. If you capture the teachers, you'll capture the next generation of students, and then you capture the future of a country. And that is the vision that they've implemented for at least 30 years, arguably probably 40 years, and that's why our education system is completely destroyed at the K through 12 level.
Wow, that's a lot to swallow. Okay, moving on. Commissioner Manny Diaz is the Commissioner of Education in Florida, lifelong educator, started teaching in 1994 right here in Miami. He's been an assistant principal, CEO of Darrell College, state representative, state senator, was appointed as commissioner to be the Commissioner of Education by the Florida State Education Board in 2022. I first became aware of the Commissioner when he spoke at the Freedom Foundation's Teacher Freedom Summit back in 2022, and have been following some of the great work that you've been doing down here. Commissioner, we'll get to the good side of this later, I think. But why do you think there's so little optimism from the public when it comes to public education today?
Well, there's a lot to unpack there, and I think James unpacked a lot of it there. It's interesting because it has the list of things that we've been trying to address right here in Florida, right? You're talking about, especially during, after COVID, where parents figured this out. They saw what was going on and were appalled. And you go back to, you have a few ways to deal with this, right? This has been going on for decades. They finally got down to the K-12 system. It started in higher ed, critical theory that later became critical race theory, all of those things. Clearly tied to Marxism. There's no argument there. The facts are there. But, it's gotten down and it's become an issue that parents are now aware of. And so the signs that James is onto something are the fact that you have an explosion of school choice. Right here in Florida, we have about 400,000 students in charter schools. We have now about 500,000 students who have taken advantage of our educational savings account. And then you still have a public school system that has about 3 million students. And so how do you tackle all of these things And why is this perception out there? Well, the perception is out there clearly because I think after, like I said before, after COVID, parents are seeing it. They were asleep at the wheel. When I first ran for the House in 2012, I could not for the life of me get anybody in the community and the electorate to pay attention to what was going on at the school board level, much less what was going on inside the schools. And it finally exploded and people saw what was going on. I think that people have that perception not just because of scores, but because schools were not meeting the needs of individual kids. And the reason I say that is because in education, the educational establishment has always treated it as a collective. And there's the problem. We're not creating widgets here. These are individuals who are going to grow up and have to be the productive members of our society. And so there's so much to unpack there, but I'll go, if you look at why, here's the symptoms, right? Why has classical education exploded across the country, and why is it exploding in Florida? Because it's back to the future. It's back to values and virtues, American ideals, and basic education in preparing our students. Why have parents chosen to leave traditional schools in search of either charters or scholarships or online or homeschooling? It's because of that same fear. And so you're seeing that go across the board, and you're seeing the public now aware of it. So I think the symptoms are all there. What are the solutions? That's a whole long conversation, but I think what you've seen us trying to do in Florida is combat all of that. From the schools of education being reformed, and that's a long project, right? From having alternative certifications and having people come from other careers that have a knowledge base that they can impart on our kids come into it. But I think the most important part, I take it from the panel before, we have to go back to the future, right? We have to go back and instill the fact that we have more in common as Americans and those ideals that this country was built on, and we have to start with that. And if you're failing at that, at the prime level, at elementary school, middle school, and high school, it's going to produce problems. And you're seeing that now when you look at test scores, because we have schools spending so much time on these absurd ideas of whatever theory it is, but yet you still got 40-something% of students that can't read on grade level in third grade. I mean, that's where the problem is at. And when the public sees that, that's why you're seeing that perception.
Yeah, amen, amen. I want to get to some of the stuff that you're doing here a little bit later, but before I do, Madeline, President Madeline, okay, all right. Madam President, President of Miami-Dade College, first female president to lead one of the nation's largest educational institutions, alumni of Miami-Dade College, served in various roles throughout public education, but has always been a champion for youth. I wasn't aware of some of the great work that you were doing here until finding out that you were being on this panel, but I was shocked to learn that Miami-Dade College has over 90,000 students enrolled here. So an important institution. You obviously work in higher ed, and I'm excited to have your perspective on things here, but I want to come at it from a different angle. What are you're seeing the next generation of kids coming up after high school. What are you seeing from our generation? What are you seeing from the youth itself?
Thanks. So I'd like to start with distinguishing universities and colleges and community colleges, because who I get to see every day are working students. 60% of the 125,000 students at Miami-Dade College are first in their families to go to college. 75% need some type of aid, and 90% work while they study. They greeted you when you probably came up the steps. And so what I see is grit, resilience, persistence, looking for opportunity, and appreciation of this country. And I think that when we dump all of higher education into one, elite universities that select the students that are in the process of weeding out students. We in community colleges, open access institutions in America are the ones actually preparing the next generation of work for this country. And in a knowledge economy, we're going to fall so behind if we peddle the story that you don't need some type of knowledge and skills. You think we're getting beat today? We're going to get beat in the intellectual war like you've never seen. Because we are dumping elite universities along with the good work of open access institutions, like in Florida, the 28 colleges whose tuition hasn't been raised in 14 years. Of the 125,000 students that are at Miami-Dade College, less than 2% take on any debt. And I say that, yep. Because I think it's so important to say it and to distinguish between the two. There's a reason Florida's #1 in higher education. I served as the former chancellor of our Florida college system while our commissioner was in the Senate, and we worked together to reform developmental education, to implement performance funding for our colleges, to make sure that students were getting ready for the world of work, that they were getting opportunities for work-based learning and internships. We've redone our teacher education program. So I think, you know, when I see it, and back to your question, I'm full of optimism because I get to spend time with students and with faculty here at the college that are not thinking about any of the noise. What they're thinking every single day is, how do I prepare this student to be able to work in one of the businesses? 98% of our students stay right here and work in Miami-Dade County. So when you think about some of the other universities, they're exporting talent out all over the country. For us, we're the ones creating the talent, which leads to the economic development. So I'm full of hope.
Okay, so the answer
Yeah, one of us has to be really optimistic up here.
yes. The answer is send your kids to Miami-Dade College.
Yeah, the team is wondering who's up there right now. Why is she so fun?
Well, that's a good segue, actually, because I want to flip back to Commissioner Diaz and talk about, you know, like all Fox News talking heads, it's like we've identified the problem but have come up with no solution. But I know you have, Commissioner Diaz, and what you've done in Florida. Perhaps you could talk about, we've identified the issues, what solutions have you implemented and how have they worked out for Florida?
Well, like I said before, it's a lot to unpack, but you have these various levels that James mentioned in the opening. So you go to the heart of the problem is this infection has reached K-12, and so we had to go in there first and eliminate in K-12 all of these theories from being taught, from critical race theory to gender theories, to all of those things. Number one, they don't belong there. Number two, it takes away from the actual learning that should be going on. But you have to recognize first that there's an infection there and you have to get rid of it. So we passed legislation to clear that. And how it's working in a state of 23 million people with 67 school districts and 3 million students is you're playing whack-a-mole, because there's still instances where you're going to find it, where you're going to have people that have gone into this for the wrong reason, or just frankly have been indoctrinated and don't know any better. And so you have to get those people away from our kids. The people that are in those classrooms have to be people that are in it to teach kids. Teachers, most of our teachers, the vast majority wake up in the morning because they want kids to do math. They want to teach kids how to read. They want to teach kids proper history. Outside of that, in order to fix the problem further down the line, you have to reform your schools of education, right? We know that that's been a major problem and a point of emphasis for where this infection has come. One example here at Miami-Dade is the School of Education here is not your typical school of education. We have the Florida Charter School Institute based here at Miami-Dade, which is working on teaching and learning and expanding choice and what are best practices. So you don't have siloed off a place where you're just teaching teachers content and all this. You have an overarching theme where teachers would leave your understanding that the world is different today and that choice is a huge component of that. And what are we teaching? Teaching teachers how to teach, the mechanics of teaching, making sure that they have strong content. Not all of the other nonsense that we have unfortunately found even in institutions within the state. So we passed that legislation to go ahead and go in and reform the schools of education. And that's the next level. Now, what are we doing even in higher ed? Because this is where it comes from. We've gone in and taken a look at our entire general education scheme, right? Because there is academic freedom, but let's not confuse the two things. The state that funds this education has the ability to determine what the gen ed curriculum is. And the gen ed curriculum should be that. It should be the fundamental structure that a student builds. When we're talking going forward into students being able to go out into the workforce, it becomes a national security issue. It becomes an economic issue. First of all, we have to get them at the elementary and high school and middle school level and make sure that they understand the founding of the country, that they love our country, that they understand everything, how the world works. But then when you're building on these skills, you have to be able to put that in without all of the other noise and all the nonsense that leads to have, producing activists. No, we're not producing activists. We're producing citizens that are able to go out and not only produce economically, but uphold our republic. Okay, so the reforms have gone there. We've removed some things that have become controversial. We removed it at the college level, sociology, from the gen ed. Doesn't mean a student can't take sociology in college. That's false. At the Board of Governors, I'm a member of the Board of Governors of the university system. I made the motion to remove it from the gen ed core at the university level. If a student wants to take sociology, that's fine. But that is not a basic fundamental course that a student should have to take, right, when they're in their college career. So we've reformed that and gotten all of those things out of higher ed. And then we go to the most controversial thing, which I don't think is controversial at all, and I think most people who are rational don't think is controversial, which is this whole idea that Florida bans books. Well, I'm here to tell you, guarantee, we don't ban any books. You can buy any book you want. You can read any book you want in Florida. You can order it on Amazon. You can pick it up at your bookstore. However, there is a responsibility and a right to curate the books that end up in an elementary school classroom and library, in a middle school classroom and library, in a high school classroom and library, and it has to be material that is both appropriate for education, and number two, it has to be age and developmentally appropriate. In other words, you shouldn't have books sitting in a high school classroom that belong in middle school, or an elementary classroom that belong in middle school and high school. So you oftentimes see the stories, a school district that decided to move a book from an elementary shelf over to a middle school or a high school, and Florida's banning books. And this is another piece of that operation that James mentioned, because through those books, they're getting those concepts in. The other piece is our textbook adoption process. So we have a statewide textbook adoption process in which we adopt textbooks every year in different subjects, and then districts get to choose which ones they buy. Well, we're not going to allow books that take, we had an issue with the first adoption we had as I became commissioner, where we had rejected like 65% of the books submitted, and it was math. And people are looking at us and saying, how are you rejecting books in math? Well, the problem is you have word problems in math books. Word problems, they go to elementary school, word problems, they go to middle school, and what are they doing in these word problems? These publishers print national editions, right? Well, not in Florida. You're not going to indoctrinate our kids using a word problem in math. We're going to get back to basic math and understanding that if Johnny takes a train from Cleveland and is heading east towards New York, and Susie leaves New York an hour before, what time do the trains cross? We need to get back to that and them understanding the concepts, not us implementing there, infusing, that you have the confusion where students are forced at an elementary age to talk about two moms or two dads, or somebody who had some kind of surgery, or whatever else they're trying to infuse in that. When people become adults, they have the time and the opportunity to have those conversations. So, but I think the biggest piece is as you're putting in those reforms, you have to have an outlet for the parents. And then, so you have parents' rights at our schools where parents have the right to transparency, not just of the books, the curriculum, what is being taught, but also you have to give them an outlet, and that outlet is choice. And so parents will vote with their feet in Florida because we have universal choice, and parents have the ability to walk and take those dollars that belong to them, they don't belong to the government, and choose an education that is not only has the right values, but also that fits that individual's kid. And sometimes you have 4 kids in a family and all 4 of them are doing something different, right? That has been the process here in Florida of getting at that. Is the work done? Absolutely not. There's a lot of work to be done because you're talking about decades of infection in this case that you have to scrub out, but you have to start somewhere.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I wish we could just replicate the commissioner across all 50 states. James, you played a great role in exposing some of the issues in your books, but from your perspectives, what are some of the solutions that you've seen, been able to identify? What can help fix that? Obviously, they got it handled here in Florida, but let's talk about the 49 other states, perhaps. What can we be doing differently to fix our education system?
Stop electing Democrats. Break the teachers' unions. So actually, this is a hard question that you've asked me, not because I think the question's hard or it's difficult to talk about solutions, but because let's say that one of the other 49 states' legislatures invited me to speak today instead of being here, and they asked me, what should we do to fix education? I would tell them, you should look at what Florida's doing. That's what I just said this in Alaska 2 days ago. And so I say, you should look at what Florida's doing. So the commissioner has already said exactly most of the kind of practical, on-the-ground solutions that the state level apparatus can provide. And I don't have anything that I would add to that list, particularly in terms of those kinds of solutions. But I will talk about kind of, I won't go into the stop electing Democrats, but I will go into the role of the teachers union just to add something on. In Florida, by the way, also I talk about this sometimes, although the details are for me a little bit thin, so you'll have to look into it, or maybe Manny can elaborate if there's time. But the union is a major problem, and if this was the state of California, you can summarize the state of California and the way it works pretty simply. The union promises votes, and the state delivers contracts, and therefore you always get the same Democrats, whether they're the same name or same face, doesn't matter. You get the same Democrats in office who award the same crony contracts to the same union bosses, and you have this revolving door, and they promise the votes, and this is how this works, and you have this enormous corruption. And so we really need to take a hard look at this public sector union problem, and I did just generalize. It's not just teachers unions. Public sector unions, and just theoretically, it's very simple with public sector unions. We'll compare against private sector unions. You can think whatever you want about private sector unions, but at the end of the day, and they have their own problems, that's not what I'm saying, but they work as a incorporation of the people or incorporation of the worker in order to be able to leverage collective capital against management, which otherwise holds trump cards that they don't have any way to deal with. And so in principle, that's the way a union is supposed to work. And so in a private sector union, you have this dynamic. You have workers who then incorporate through the union, who then lobby management to get some kind of a concession, and the management has to offer some kind of a concession because now they've got the threat of a strike or whatever other problems from the union. They also have a profit motive. At the end of the day, management still has to figure out how not to give too much away. They have their own skin in the game. This does not exist in a public sector union. If the public sector union goes and lobbies against its management or its boss, it's lobbying against the state. And unless you have very responsible people in the state, what you're going to have is just another handout, another handout, another handout. In other words, the public sector union has a unique way to leverage because the thing it's leveraging against doesn't have its own profit motive. And so since that's lacking there, what you end up with is a state like California, where the unions and then the representatives that serve the unions end up in a revolving door, mostly of money kind of situation, and you get rampant corruption that drives the state into a cliff. And where do all these awful policies that you end up having to fix? They don't just come from this ideology floating around out there. They come from corrupt implementation. I mean, if you were to look, for example, at a lot of the nonprofit organizations that have come in and provided the racial justice CRT curriculum, you will find that in very many of the cases, this is a gigantic grift. They're selling something that's absolutely not just poisonous and toxic, but absolutely asinine in terms of its construction. It's not grounded in legitimate understanding of how the world works. It doesn't help, it doesn't add to education, it provides nothing, and then it's $3 million or something absolutely crazy. And then you find always, I call it the iron law of woke corruption, you always find that it's some politician or administrator that's hooking up a friend who offers this is what you end up with when you have a public sector union. So the only thing I can add to my answer to your question directly is look at Florida. And so we can just let you talk some more. Or to add to that, which Florida's also doing, like I remarked, is you've got to neuter, if not take the public sector union, the teachers unions out of the game. Just a little sidebar, if you don't know why the schools were so vigorously closed, except in Florida, during the so-called pandemic, the reason that they were so vigorously closed was because the teachers unions, particularly the AFT under Randy Weingarten, was running an extortion racket on the government. They were going to keep it closed until the government gave them $1 trillion contract, which is exactly the kind of cronyism that I was talking about a moment ago. And of course they got that with the CARES Act in the end. They got their $1 trillion, and then what happened? The schools opened back up, and they've used all of that, or not all, but a very large amount of that money, proportion of that money, to implement more social emotional learning and the other nonsense they're using to brainwash and indoctrinate our kids. So you can see how the manipulation works. So I think we're not getting out of this mess so long as there's public schooling of any kind, and they will try to move into the choice domain as well, and get their claws into all education as that expands, until we deal with the teachers union problem, and of course that's what your organization does so well.
So that was meant to be the optimistic part of the panel for James. But I'll fill in just a second, and I will say that there has been, I mean, COVID really helped us, but there has been a record decline of union membership in America over the past 4 years because teachers and all government workers are becoming awoken, not woke, but awoken to the fact that their union dues dollars are just going to fund radical politicians and are far better served going into their pockets, and appreciated the work of Commissioner Diaz and what they've been able to do in Florida to make it more of a level playing field. Madeline, I want to shift gears a little bit with you, and I want to ask you specifically, we're here to talk about technology as well, the role that you see AI playing in the future of education and how that can be used as a tool.
So that's a good question. So the college has led the state in artificial intelligence, created the first college credit certificate, associates in science, and bachelors of applied science and AI. But we didn't start by doing a major. We started with having about 500 of our faculty in the fall of 2021 go to AI workshops, right? Data-driven AI workshops. In 2022, we launched a grant program. A faculty could write a grant on how they would use AI and VR to enhance teaching and learning. Student success, great things came out of it just on, especially around algebra and AI and English and all of that. And then we rolled out the program. And so I say that because I think that there's two types of AI, and that's the open AI. And that's out, it's gone. I like to tell our team, the first version of Britannica Encyclopedia was my AI. I had Britannica Encyclopedia, it was behind, the doors. I had to clean the table before I could open it up. It brown with gold. The students always laugh when they asked would I ban it. I said, look, if you would have knocked on my mom's door, she would have had a chancleta if you were going to take away and that, flip-flop and smacked you. And she was a school teacher. But then came the Compton CD, and that was again. And so I think then came the internet, and how scared we were then, and now you've got OpenAI. And OpenAI has simply democratized information, not knowledge. Why it's so important that the foundational skills, it's not good enough in our country or in our state that 56% of third graders read on grade level, because you cannot be a critical thinker if you're not understanding the knowledge and what you're reading, and that's going to be critical in the open AI and the speed of open AI. Then there's AI that we hope can be for the good, and that's going to be for nursing students and business majors and others on how you can use AI that will help with patient outcomes. And then I think there's the policy aspect, that we didn't learn much from TikTok and some of the others because we haven't put those policies in, and now we're late to the game on how that's going to be utilized. That's going to be for policymakers. I think for education, it has transformed the way that we gather information. And so I think, I sat with a group of faculty and they said, how would you how would you do assessment? And I said, well, if I was teaching English 1101 and I knew you had to do a persuasive essay on something, I'd put it on ChatGPT and I'd let the class see that it just did it. And that's 5% of my grade. If you can do that, maybe you used it. But the point is, how are you then going to go apply it? How are you going to think critically about it? And more importantly, how are you going to test for its accuracy? How are you going to challenge everything that you read? And so we've got almost 1,000 individuals that are enrolled in our AI program. Average age is 40. It's second careers. The first course that you take is ethics and artificial intelligence. And we've got to start there, just like our public schools nor private schools can be our center for family values. Values have to come from families. Schools have to reinforce those values. Ethics need to have to be a core part of who you are. And when we're thinking about AI, how do you apply then ethics? If you're an engineer, if you're going into managing our student investment funds, or if you're going into teaching. So it's how we're approaching it. I think that if higher education hangs on to the taxi medallions and doesn't make the move as to Ubers, higher education will not survive. The massive MOOCs had nothing to do with it. This is about the future of education is personalized. It is fast, it's rapid, and that's why we've built stackable credentials. You come in, one semester, you get a college credit certificate. If that's enough for to go get a job, go get a job. If you want to continue on your associates, that'll work, and if you want to go on to a bachelor's, that'll work. And I think those stackable credentials with multiple entry and exit points are going to be much more accelerated in the world that AI comes into the teaching and learning process and to the assessment process.
Yeah, very innovative. I actually want to stay with you here, Madeline. We're at the Economic Club of Miami, and I've heard you talk before on a podcast, I think maybe it was Bambi's podcast, about industry partners actually helping build curriculum for students. Could you tell us a little bit more about that, and maybe there's some practical application for some of our audience here?
Yeah, so we don't start a program that's a workforce program without industry experts in the room. We're not going to just put up a program that satisfies us. We're going to put up a program that satisfies the industry needs. So every single one of our workforce programs has an advisory committee. That advisory committee are business and industry experts. And whether it's healthcare CEOs if we're building out a different nursing track, or in the case of artificial intelligence, it's industry experts in AI, and not just AI on the technology front, but also on the industry, whether it's healthcare or business. We did that with cybersecurity, and the results is that we're the only institution in the country with an associate's in science and a bachelor's of applied science in cybersecurity, which has an NSA Center of Excellence designation at a community college level, not at an R1 university level.
Wow, impressive. Okay, so Commissioner Diaz, we're in a room full of business leaders, stakeholders in this fight. What can they be doing today to move the needle in the right direction when it comes to education?
Look, I think it's clear that we've identified the issues. So when we go back to the inception of education and what's the point, first of all, if you're getting community pressures, right, let's say right here in Miami-Dade, the pressures that are normally put on the school system in Miami-Dade and put on the state college here in Miami-Dade, coming from not just the parents and the taxpayers, but coming from the business community, the investment community, that we've seen such a boom here in Florida, specifically in Miami. What are the needs that are going to continue to fuel, how do you solve for the needs that are going to continue to fuel that going forward? It is putting the pressures on the system to provide the product that is needed to fuel this economy. But I have to preface that by saying that it's not just skills. We can't, our state college is doing an incredible job, especially here at Miami-Dade, which identifying what the needs are, right, and putting people through those skills. But by the time they get to Madeline, we have to have individuals that are versed in the foundation of the country, and understanding that this place didn't just pop up out of nowhere, and that, you know, I was mentioned in the other pattern, nowhere else in the world, and you heard it from people who have been in all those places, do you have these opportunities. And so I firmly believe that you have to have that foundation, and then you build the skills onto that. And that includes grammar, that includes soft skills, being able to communicate verbally, rhetoric. But I think sometimes you'll see the business community just push, especially in an industry, just push on what the needs of that industry are when it comes to skills specific. And I think it behooves all of us to be pushing and demanding from the system that they are producing students that are not just skilled in those individual skills, but they're the complete package. And I think if you do that, again, you're going to see the results of just go back to the 50s, the 40s and the 50s in this country, and what was happening when we had that boom. How were our students coming out of our basic K-12 schools? They had a certain understanding of the founding of the country, and then there were skills that were built upon that. We need to do that now, and yes, it looks different. You can leverage technology to do that, but I think if you have everybody rowing in the same direction, so you have the taxpayers, the community, the parents pushing, and you have the business and industry community pushing on that as a whole, I think we're better off. And if you look at that, if you really do that 10 years down the line, we can solve a lot of the issues, going back to the issues that James outlined at the beginning that we're trying to tackle. But you can't tackle that. The government cannot solve for these issues. Sure, we can attack it and try to solve the problem, but you need buy-in from everybody. Everybody has to row in the same direction. And the reason we've been able to make strides here in Florida is because we have people paying attention because of COVID. And so that should give us an idea that everybody in this room, whether it's an industry or their investment capital, those things are important. Don't gloss over that, because I think you see the tail of that is causing some issues right now in the generation that has gone into the workforce because there's been a lack of that.
Yeah, exactly right. James, there's an election well, actually, before I say this, if we have audience questions, then we can do that after this one. James, there's an election coming up, so I have two questions for you. You're very politically active. One, what do you think will be the outcome? And two, how do you think this election affects our education system, if at all?
So what is it, 7 days away or something like that? It's right around the corner. I lost track of time because I went to Alaska over the weekend, so I don't know what day it is. I don't know where I am. There's a lot of time zones and a red eye. We're 7 days out from this election, and I dare not make a single guess. That's the state of this election. The only guess that I have right now, and it's only like a 50-50, is I think there will be an election. I'm not totally firm in that either. What I can say is that it looks very much that without some kind of tremendous misfeasance that we are likely to see a Trump victory. I think it's not safe to just bet on that. So who knows? Our October surprise seems to be missing, so we don't have much October left. So I guess that's like tomorrow or something. So keep your eyes peeled. I don't know. I don't even know how to predict this one, but I do think it's looking very much like, if we can take anything at face value, very much like a Trump administration's coming in. And what does that have to do with education? I would honestly say everything. I was regretting shutting up the last time, because as soon as I stopped talking, I was like, oh yeah, another thing that's really important besides breaking unions is breaking the federal leash on education. The federal money education and federal money in education problem is so much of a bigger problem than the state money in education problem, because the federal government is misusing its power and authority to jerk the states around and make them implement this stuff. For example, we have social emotional learning in our schools primarily for one and only one reason, which is the passage of the 2015 Every Student Succeeds Act, which requires all schools to report on non-academic competencies in order to receive federal funding, it's about this thick, so among a bunch of other provisions. And so whether it's Common Core before that, whether it was No Child Left Behind before that, there was one that the Clintons did in the 90s and I forgot. Every one of these major federal education programs has caused education to get worse, not better. And the only way to get that to get fixed is to unhitch the federal horse from the state wagons. And a Trump administration makes that extraordinarily possible. He's interested in diminishing or eliminating the Department of Education, which a lot of people think, yeah, my gosh, that's in the Constitution. No, you guys are a smarter room, but it was founded in 1979 and it's not had a single positive return on investment yet. Everything it governs has gotten worse as long as it has existed. And so that's a major opportunity. Creating task force at the federal level that can coordinate with the states, and people like Commissioner Diaz would be absolutely invaluable for transforming the state of education in this country for the next few years. But more importantly, when we start talking about the federal government, the reason we want to unhook that and why opportunity of a Trump administration so good, we want to unhook that because if in 2028, for whatever reason, another Democrat were to take office or a crazy Republican, it doesn't even have to be a Democrat, Republicans can go rotten too, as we all know. If somebody bad takes office, then that federal apparatus is sitting there in their hands. And that's exactly the problem that we've had all this time that's ratcheted us to where we are. So we really want to try to enforce a greater degree of subsidiarity in our education and get the Trump administration, I think, the potential for one, the apparent likelihood of one, suggests that we have at least some hope for optimism in that regard. So you didn't think I was going to have optimism, but that's because you didn't ask me the AI question, because then we get real dark.
Wonderful. Okay, we have a question over here.
I do want to say James is right about the AI dark horse, without a shadow of a doubt, as is cybersecurity and the dark horse there that should not be taken lightly, not so much by education institutions, but certainly national policy.
Oh yeah, I'm petrified of it.
A word I didn't hear mentioned was tenure. And as a trustee of a public university here in Florida, we now have a new rule in Florida law that says we have 5-year review on tenure, which I think is a start. But I think that I would have to say gutless trustees and with administrators and provosts that don't want to really deal with these issues, we really need to remove tenure. I find tenure, and I'd be interested really in you guys' opinion of that. I mean, I wish I had tenure in my business, that I can't get fired if I say something wrong and try to take advantage of academic freedom. James or the commissioner, where do you see the future of trying to reduce or eliminate tenure in the state of Florida and around the country?
I will say we have continuing contracts, not tenure, because I think you were in the legislature when we tried to do it in 2014, right?
Yeah, and you've already seen a result of that policy being put in. So what happened is you saw, I don't know the data now, but we saw quite a few professors that were relieved of their duties at institutions across the state. I don't know if that happened at your institution, but you found that these individuals, especially in the research area, had spent years and years collecting a paycheck, and they no longer were providing anything of value. In other words, there was no research going on, there was no value to the university, yet they couldn't be touched because there's tenure. While everybody in the system from the faculty side always said that the world's going to fall apart, the world did not fall apart. If people are indeed producing and doing their jobs, they should be held responsible. And if you look at these salaries, it's not like they're very well paid, and so there should be a responsibility. At the end of the day, they're a public employee. I mean, this is where did we get to the point where, from our K-12 teacher to the college and university, you're public employees. There's a duty and a responsibility, and I do think that was a big accomplishment. I think you have to see a couple of years of data of how that works and where the tweaks are, because inevitably, with every, having 10 years in the legislature, how many times you go back and revisit things, because you try it, and as you're implementing, you figure out, okay, here's the loophole, or here's what I can do better. I think the Freedom Foundation has probably dealt with some of that experimentation in the public sector union legislation here in Florida, where there are tweaks that need to be made, right? But I think that you're seeing something be effective. What is the next step? Let's look and see how it worked, and where do you take it next?
Yeah, tenure reform is absolutely critical. Let's start by giving the justification for what tenure is supposed to achieve. Because I had a couple of those professors, by the way, who, they decided they didn't really, like, I had a math professor who he literally told us we all got an A if we went on some hike with him in the mountains in some rainy
You
day.
didn't go to a community college, right?
That was at the University of Tennessee, if anybody needs to know. So he couldn't be fired because he had tenure. So, but why is tenure supposed to be there? The idea was it was supposed to be a guarantor of academic freedom, that you could have a professor putting forth a very heterodox view of whatever theories are in his field, or maybe even speaking in other fields, but presenting a heterodox view, and can't kind of have a department witch hunt, throw him out because he's got some new theory of gravity or whatever, like Einstein. That was the general idea of tenure. And the question is, when we look at what we should do with this, is it serving that purpose? And the answer is no. And do we need it to serve that purpose? And the answer is no. It's not serving that purpose. The primary problem that we have right now is that it's not even the no-value professor who's riding on his tenure coattails. It's actually the activist who's now gotten tenure that you can't get rid of. And activism is not their job. And so you have now public employees, or even if it's a private university, you have employees who are not doing their job. They're doing a different job than the job they were hired for, and they're effectively invincible. So you do a 7-year process, get your tenure, and now you can just completely transform your entire set of job duties, and you're now a problem for the administration for them to solve without very many tools. So that has to be weeded out. It seems to me that as long as there's some basic guarantee that you're not going to be the victim of some kind of a political witch hunt, whether in the department, which might be, like I said, gravity specific if it's physics, or if you are a political witch hunt like let's get rid of all the conservatives because we're all woke here, as long as you can't be victimized for that, as long as your academic freedom is preserved, then tenure is not necessary whatsoever, and is actually creating a set of loopholes and externalities that we need to deal with. So I'm sympathetic to the idea that we need to get rid of it, because it doesn't serve the purpose that it was intended to serve in the first place, and it can be served in a different way by figuring out different ways to guarantee academic freedom, which basically is really the First Amendment, but it's a little trickier with employment and department politics.
Yeah, it shouldn't be a radical concept that you should fire people if they're not doing their job, but it seems like in public education today, it is from K through 12 up through higher ed. I mean, the left was radical about defunding the police when police officers aren't doing their job, but we seem to settle for having teachers in the schools that are not doing their jobs, and devaluing public education is such a terrible thing to do as a society. I think we had another question over here somewhere. Yeah.
So my question is this: you have many young men and women who probably bright people, but they graduate high school, and a lot of times they have no idea what they want to do next, but they're kind of coached throughout high school. Well, you're going to go to college. If they decide they don't want to do that, they're almost looked down upon. It's almost like, are you sure you want to make that mistake? But then what happens is there's a lot of people who go to college and they're 2 or 3 years in, and they realize, I think I made a mistake. I don't even know what I'm doing here. I don't like my degree, and I'm not passionate about this. Now they're, sometimes, up to their eyeballs in debt, and 3 years down the line, they could have been making money, but they're covered in debt, and they have to kind of start over. And so my question is, to get to the point, what would you recommend, specifically Madam President, but everybody else, what would you recommend to somebody who's graduated high school and is standing there not really knowing what they want to do? Would you recommend that they go to college, or recommend that they hold off until they have a specific reason for them to go pursue a degree?
Look, I don't think it's either or. One of the things I will tell you, here in Miami-Dade County, there's an average of about 25,000 students that graduate from public high school. 52% go to college. We don't have a college-going problem per se. We really don't. What we've got to think about as a state, as a community, as a nation, is where do we need the skills? Where do we need the knowledge? What do we need for the future of work? And what do we need for the homeland security of our country? And then go on those tracks. I don't think that a private university pathway is for every student. I think that if you're not sure, get a job. Enroll at a local college. go for something that you're interested. That's why if you're interested in cybersecurity at the college, you start in a college credit certificate. You go hands-on 100% into that. And if that's what you love doing, then we'll start working on the other stuff towards a degree, towards an industry certification. I think there's multiple pathways. I don't believe that this linear four-university pathway is the one, and that's why the public confidence in higher education is, at 50%, because we have said this. I do think we have to be cautious about not oversteering and thinking everybody just needs to go into a vocational program. There's nothing wrong with vocational programs. They're very good. They're small business owners, and in this community, 85% of our businesses are small business owners, including all of my uncles. How do you balance what the country needs in terms of talent, what your companies require in terms of skills to stay competitive and thrive, and then look at how students get exposed earlier to internships and work-based opportunities while they're in high school, and really then looking at while they're in that college pathway, how are they also earning credit? We have focused a lot of our work now at the college in giving students credit for working. So if you've been working, we want to go ahead and take it and say, let's give you 6 or 8, 9 credits for the job experience and put a premium on working while you're going to college.
And I think Madeline is the antithesis of the statement I'm going to make. As our governor famously says, we're going to eliminate the degrees in zombie studies and driving people to do that and then be in debt. This is the other side of that is, look, the part of the allure of higher education is you want a well-rounded individual, but that's why I'm saying we have to build these skills of the understanding of the country, of grammar, all of those things early on, so when our students get to higher ed, they're not going into zombie studies or gender studies and then racking up all this debt. They should be able to explore within the fields that are going to lead them to a career or to betterment in society, not going in there to waste their time and really just rack up debt or be subsidized by the taxpayers, which is what happens oftentimes.
I didn't think we were going to talk about my favorite conspiracy theory, but I think it was a psyops that everybody has to go to college. At this point, everybody has to go to college, everybody has to go to college. This has been one of the worst narratives that our guidance counselors, even our parents, sorry boomers, that you guys all pushed on my generation and younger. But the fact is, if I were to sit down to mentor a person of that age, my question would be, don't go to college, or my answer would be, don't go to college so you know what you want to do, which might include experimenting in college to see if you want to take that road. And so you've got to get that clear-eyed vision. So I think that's the narrative. It's exactly what you said, that we should be saying, instead of, if you want a good job, you have to go to college. The answer that we should be, or the idea we should be planting in our young people's heads, both as parents and as school counselors, well, school counselors is the thing, guidance counselors, we'll go back to that, should be, you need to get clear-eyed on what you want to do, and let's equip you to take that path. This is kind of what you were talking about with all of the kind of different exit ramps, to have this kind of more dynamic educational program. But you've got to have that clear purpose. So if you're talking to somebody individually, and if you say, well, what do you want to do in life? And they say they don't know, you'd say figure that out first, or at least a first step, and see where it goes as an experiment. Because these kids that go to college and don't know what they want to do, why they're going to college, they're going to stumble through college, and then they're going to go to a job interview, and they're going to just, this is what I'm running into in industry, is I'm hearing people ask this question in interviews. Why did you go to college? What did you want to accomplish with it? Well, it's the thing you do after high school. No job, no direction, no initiative. It's a really great litmus test question. So that's what I would actually encourage us to start looking at in terms of counseling young people.
Francisco, you were waving frantically. We got one more.
One question from a 14-year-old.
Oh yeah, let's hear it.
Hi, I'm Branson Rosen, and I'm actually 12. And my mom wants me to go to Stanford, but to me they just seem like indoctrination centers, and they cost way too much money. So,
Miami-Dade College is a much better choice.
so I was wondering, is it worth it to go to these colleges if it might put me in debt?
That's a great question.
Well, first of all, we have an internship at the Florida Department of Education for you right now after that statement.
And then we give credit for that, and he can be in dual enrollment. And I'll pitch this to you: get your associates before you graduate high school. In Florida, you can get your Associates of Arts, and that's your first 60 credits. Knock it out while you're in high school, and then you've got exactly what we were saying here. You've got a better picture of what you think you want to pursue.
I'll give you a much darker answer.
I
No, so since you're 12, and you mentioned Stanford specifically, you might need to update your folks. The Ivy League schools right now are kind of falling off of a cliff in terms of their reputation. They're still in very, very high regard, and there's no doubt that in many fields and in many regards, Stanford and the other schools are very good. So that's going to come down to your individual ability to navigate that indoctrination center. That's going to be a question for you to work with your parents and decide, do you have the core to be able to survive that kind of environment? Because it's going to come at you from all sides, and it's going to be very hard, and it's going to be very expensive, but you have the possibility, should the reputation remain, to get a very good job where think of going to school as an investment in your future. Okay, you're investing in you, as yourself, as a person, and then you can capitalize on the gains that you make there, which is exactly the way the Marxists don't want you to think about education. They call it the banking theory of education, and it's no good. So you should think about it that way. It's an investment, and then you have to start looking at different possible investment pathways, and it may or may not be the right one. But in the meantime, since you're 12 and you've got a few years to decide, if Stanford's reputation goes in the garbage dump between now and then, and Harvard's is already there, then don't go there. Go somewhere else. Miami-Dade sounds pretty good. There's a bunch of great schools here in Florida. I don't know about the University of Tennessee where I went, hold off. But give it a few years and look, because I think that there is about to be, we've talked in the last panel about a sea change in technology. We could have talked about that in this panel for the future of education, but there's going to be a sea change coming also in which, after this last 12 months in particular, which universities are going to be considered the most elite and valuable and important universities, and what those look like over the next 4 to 5 years, I think.
One observation that I've made when just hiring people, obviously we hired some more ideologue type folks, but those that go to more conservative universities versus more liberal institutions, indoctrination centers as you called them, is that they actually, the ones that go to the indoctrination centers tend to be more stronger in their beliefs. They tend to, because they've argued with people. They've spent their like 4 years just, what did you do in college? I argued with liberals. Okay, we've got a pretty good spot for you. And I'd also fight with the commissioner. If you want to go work for the government, great, but come work at the Freedom Foundation. Do we have time for one more, Francisco? Yay, nay? That's it? Okay, all right, thank you everybody. Please give our panelists a round of applause.